Hey, thanks for joining us again on another episode of Three Distinct Knocks. Tonight we have brother Jason E. Marshall from Hominy, Oklahoma. See, he's quite the author, having penned numerous articles for Societas Rosicruciana, the Masonic Society. He's also a featured writer for the Living Stones magazine. He's also founder and editor of thelaudablepursuit.com. Tonight we're going to be speaking to him regarding his book titled The Path, using the religions of the world as a guide to personal and spiritual development. The book is available on Amazon and can be found in the description below and on our website. Masonically, this guy has an awesome background. Current secretary of Lodge Veritas number 556, a TO Lodge. He's member of the Guthrie Valley Scottish Rite in the Southern Jurisdiction, where he's 32nd degree. Past chairman of the Mentorship Committee. Current secretary and education committee instructor. Past high priest of chapter Veritas number 103, 7th degree Adeptus Exemptus of the SRICF of the Oklahoma College. He's a member of the Oklahoma Order of High Priesthood, the Masonic Order of, and excuse me for killing this, L Stand, Flint Court number 91. He's a past sovereign of Aquitas Council number 546 of the Allied Masonic degrees. When he's not at Lodge, and for the record, I can't imagine a night when he's not at Lodge, he's using his bachelor's in political science of cultural studies and his Juris Doctorate, utilizing that as a practicing attorney in Oklahoma. He also enjoys studying and writing on subjects regarding philosophy, spiritual practices, and comparable religions. He also loves classic cars, spending time in nature, and craft beers and cigars.
And before we start talking to Jason, it's time for today's rant. I took 4 years of Latin in high school and continued with Latin in college. There was a time when I could read Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars in Latin fairly easily. I spent a semester translating Ovid as a part of a group exercise and enjoyed the experience. I have, of course, lost much of my Latin in the intervening years. A lack of practice has shrunk my vocabulary, and my memory of Latin grammar is incredibly unreliable. I remember, for example, all the prepositions that take the ablative, ob, cum, de, ex, impro, sine, sub, and super. Thank you, Doris Kays, my high school Latin teacher. But I honestly don't remember any of those ending charts that I used to know so well. English is my native language, and in general, I'm fairly skilled in its use. But despite the years that have elapsed since my Latin class, when I get myself into a grammatical quagmire, I often find myself relying on my understanding of grammar from Latin to reason my way through the English. Because English is my native language, it is so familiar to me that the rules are often invisible. I may know something is wrong, but have trouble, ironically, putting into words what the rules should be. Latin provided me with a different framework, one unfamiliar, that I had to learn, and in the process, it made me a better user of my native language. I think there is a similar phenomenon that occurs in the area of religion. I grew up with my faith, although I admit it has matured and grown as I've learned and experienced more of the world. It is appropriately more complex than it was when I was 6. But it is, much like English, something with which I am so familiar that sometimes it's hard to see it. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, particularly in the Southern Jurisdiction, provides in its degrees and in its teaching an opportunity for men to explore comparative theology in an environment in which proselytization and conversion are not the goal. It presents those truths that underlie all the world's great faiths and allows for the candidates to contextualize them in terms of their own experiences and faith. That most misquoted book, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, despite some of the flaws that were a product of its time, is a remarkable and still incredibly important work of comparative theology. It provides a philosophical, moral, and mystical exploration of the testimony provided in numerous faiths, and again, permits the reader to understand his own experience better by comparison and contrast. Freemasonry does not promote a particular religion, but it does encourage every man to pay that rational homage to deity that is both a duty and a source of happiness. It hopes to help each man become a better exemplar of his own faith. In that context, an exposure to a wide range of religious thought can only be helpful. It lets us see the ocean in which we have always stood from the shore. It helps us to see the commonalities shared by the most aspirational, hopeful, and inspirational expressions of the human condition. It brings us from the limits of our own understanding to the understanding of the total community of humanity, and it allows us to enter that conversation that humans have been having with God from the beginning. And to help us have that conversation today, we have Jason Marshall with us, who, as you heard earlier, wrote The Path. Jason, in looking at the bio on the book, it says that the book really grew out of an experience that you had in a comparative theology course you were taking in college. That something happened during that course to you. What was that?
Well, probably be best to kind of start at the beginning. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home, very active in the Nazarene church. And I think I was one of those kids that every Sunday school teacher hates because I have a lot of questions, and just because, or that's the way it is, doesn't work. And maybe that's why I'm an attorney as well. Because I can remember just getting in theological battles in just Sunday school church saying, well, and for example, that you have to be a Christian and believe in Jesus to go to heaven, or you can go to hell. Then I say, well, what about the poor kid in Africa who has never heard of Jesus? Is he going to hell? Well, maybe, maybe not. And so I've always had questions, but I think at a certain point, I just kind of relied on blind faith. And I really loved the church and thought maybe I wanted to do something, maybe a youth minister or something to that effect. And when I went to college, I kind of decided to challenge myself and take a lot of comparative religion classes. And one in particular, Dr. Greg Scott at the University of Central Oklahoma taught. And it was a brutal course. We had to read, most of your major religious books, the Old Testament, New Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, Lotus Sutra, Analects of Confucius, the Quran in a 2-semester block. And I mean, it was, and you couldn't fake that. Trust me, you couldn't show up to class and just be like, yeah, I read that. That's, I did the homework. I mean, he'd catch you on it. And during the entirety of that course, I really looked at it as all these other people are wrong. That Christianity is the only true religion. Everybody else is crazy, essentially. That, the Hinduism, that we're a divine inner being, that's wrong. And, you have to have Jesus to be saved. And it wasn't until the second semester we had to write a kind of our own personal theology. And I just couldn't do it. It was supposed to be, I think, 10 pages. I think it was 10 pages. And I've always been a pretty good BSer and able to wrap my way out of anything. And
Ernie.
yeah, exactly, right. I can BS anything. Just give me time to write it. And I just couldn't do it. I got about page and a half in, and we just keep hitting writer's block. And it was literally the night before it was due, and kind of had just a break. And I thought to myself, you're wrong. You're full of crap because you've been looking at all these religions as being wrong as opposed to trying to learn something from them. I don't have to adopt that belief system. I can learn lessons from that belief system. Mm-hmm. And I remember the next day went to Dr. Scott's office and just trembling with fear and said, look, I'm not going to be able to finish this paper. I'm sorry. I haven't been procrastinating. I've been working on it for a month. Told him what happened, and he just kind of smiled and said, well, you got a couple extra weeks. Just turn it in when you're done. And made an A, and he became a real mentor to me as far as studying the other religions.
So what is it that you do learn from studying comparative theology? What is it that it brings to your life?
I think one of the you can gain insights into your own religion by studying other religions. And I think that's where people get scared. They're like, okay, if I look at Islam or Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism, then I'm going to become a Buddhist. I'm going to become a Taoist. And it's creepy. It's scary. And the fact is, there's kind of universal truths that all religions touch on. I think that's why Freemasonry doesn't pick a particular religion, because there's universal truths. And by looking at these other religions, sometimes you can gain clarity into your own religion. In 2011, I underwent the Kala Chakra initiation with the Dalai Lama, and one of the monks there during one of the lessons said that, if I hold my hand out to you and I say, okay, what's my hand look like? And you're going to say, well, it's a little pudgy, pink, it's got some lines on it. But if somebody's standing behind me, they're going to say, well, it's got some hair and some fingernails. Who's right and who's wrong, right? So if this is your only viewpoint, you're going to say, well, this other guy's wrong. The other guy that only sees it from this vantage point is going to say the other guy's wrong. But if you look at it both ways, you get a more complete picture.
And so when did you join Freemasonry relative to this experience?
It was quite a bit later. That experience happened around 2003 or 2004. And I've always been interested in Freemasonry. Both of my grandfathers were Freemasons. My paternal grandfather in Wyoming and my maternal grandfather in Hominy, Oklahoma. And my maternal grandparents I was very close with until they passed. And I always knew it was something very special to my grandfather, and didn't really know what it was about, but I just knew it was something important. And I had actually tried to join probably around the same time, 2003, 2004, not necessarily because I saw a real connection between what I was learning and the fraternity, because frankly, I didn't know much about the fraternity, but never actually got the chance to join. I was actually an undergrad working at a 7-Eleven as a manager and working the night shift. And it was actually 2 blocks from the Masonic Lodge in Edmond, Oklahoma. And so I'd see the people walk in with their baseball hats or polo shirts, and I'd ask and say, hey, I'd like to join. Of course, they thought, well, who's this stupid kid working at a 7-Eleven? Kind of blew me off. I didn't actually join until 2007, so about 3 years after I kind of started this journey. And in fact, I had already started most of the notes that later became the book. It became the book, and so it was already kind of written before I ever even joined the fraternity. Now, it certainly helped shape it.
Did you find when you joined the Scottish Rite, it must have felt a little bit like going back to that class?
Absolutely. And I think for me, and part of, I think, anybody that really starts looking at their own personal theology or beliefs, in Jungian terms, you're undergoing the individualization process. I think there's stages that kind of mirror, really, I think, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, right, or death, where you have denial, which kind of goes to what we talked about before, where people are scared. I don't want to look at anything else. I don't want to hear about anything else. Then once you kind of are exposed to maybe some of these other ideas that put little cracks in your belief system, you become angry. And I think part of that, the depression stage really too, where you're like, well, am I the only person that doesn't necessarily fit inside of a neat mold any longer? I think, growing up, especially in a small town in Oklahoma, I mean, being Nazarene, you would think that Baptists or the Methodists were a completely different religion, that, we needed to have street fights to prove who was theologically pure and correct. And so I think for me, it was a very lonely time where I know that I was going through this process. I felt that it was right, that there wasn't anything wrong. But my dog is wanting to say hello.
Aww.
So I I thought, this process was, correct, but you're lonely. You feel like you're out on an island. And I really had my mind blown when I joined the Scottish Rite and I met Jim Tresner and Bob Davis and Chuck Dunning, where,
Well, okay,
wow.
If those are the first people you meet.
I know, right? I'm spoiled. But I think
a really rough experience you had.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was you're not crazy, right? That you're not the only person that has ever looked at these other religions and found grains of truth or strands of truth in them, and that's okay. That's actually something noble, something laudable to pursue.
Laudable to pursue. Yeah. Very, very nicely done. Too bad this isn't Talk Show, the game show. You would have earned 2 points for promoting another project. I
was thinking more of the Masonic ritual, but we'll count it. We'll count it.
Do you find that Freemasonry has helped you find a stronger spiritual basis? Do you find yourself strengthened in your faith?
I do, and I think a lot of that again goes to the fact that since I no longer really fit in a nice, neat box, going to lodge or a Masonic event, even, especially for my home lodge, Veritas, a traditional observance lodge, it is a very spiritual experience for me where I can, and we have brothers from all faiths. I mean, Rustin, our chaplain, who's, an ex-Catholic monk and Buddhist, practicing Buddhist. So, yeah, I mean, I really do think it has opened my eyes to a variety of viewpoints. I always say that my favorite lodge meetings are some of the ones where I really disagree, maybe, at least initially, with something that is presented, something that challenges me at least, where maybe not, I'm not coming from a point that this person's wrong, but it really challenges something in me. And over the next couple of weeks, it's kind of rolling around in the back of my head. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe he was right. I'll never tell the brother that he was correct. Especially
you're a past master. Come on.
Yeah, I'm a past master. You're like your wife. You don't admit this. No.
Yeah, I think for me, I come out of an Anglican tradition, and I still consider myself to be an Episcopalian. And for me, Freemasonry doesn't inform any of the orthodoxy of my faith because it doesn't have a doctrine. It doesn't have it doesn't have dogma to offer me, but it does inform the praxis of my faith. The way that I practice my faith is in part, not exclusively, but in part is Freemasonry. And I think for a lot of people who, for people who come from religious traditions that are anti-Masonic, I think it's confusing those things, orthodoxy and orthopraxy, that gets them worried about Freemasonry. That and just the fact that you're hanging out with people who aren't members of the same faith, and that is inherently suspicious.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really a tragedy, and I don't think it's necessarily a modern invention that you have an us versus them mentality. And people are genuinely scared and afraid to interact on really any level with people who are different than them. And I think, you have the term that gets thrown around a lot about echo chambers, right? Where we get our social media and our news from sources that already coincide with our previously held beliefs. And so we're never challenged. It's just everything agrees with us and everything's fine. But there's no growth there. There's no understanding about where other people are coming from or any kind of exchange of ideas. And so everybody just kind of retreats back into their camps.
Yeah. And I remember the statement that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in American life.
I've never heard that, but yeah.
It's segregated by faith. It's segregated by denomination, and unfortunately, as a result of the history of religion in the United States, it's largely segregated by race as well. And fortunately, in Freemasonry, for the most part, my Mother Lodge looks like the community that it lives in. With the exception of gender, it's one of the most diverse organizations I belong to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gives me an opportunity to really see. I was a high school debater, and to some degree, my worldview is formed out of that. I not so secretly believe that you don't have a right to an opinion if you're not willing to defend it. And I sort of think you don't have a right to a belief if you haven't thought it through and compared it with others and seen how it stands up in contrast with others. So, I find it somewhat cowardly that people won't read the Bhagavad Gita because they're terrified that it'll turn them into a Hindu. If your Christian faith is that weak, really, or whatever your faith is, if it's that weak, if it's that susceptible to subversion, how sincerely can you be holding it?
I agree. I think a lot of the problem that people talk about radical Islamic terrorism, right, or radical Islam, and part of that deal is even those people probably haven't really read the teachings of their own religion. I mean, I know a lot of Christians who have never fully read the Bible. They're just handed this belief system, and they take it whole cloth. They never question it, and they go on through their lives. And I mean, it's a waste. I mean, kind of like the unexamined life isn't worth living. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, I had a good friend who was a priest, and I overheard her very gently chewing someone out once, and her line was, "Why do you suppose that God gave you a brain if He didn't want you to use it?" Yeah. I thought that was sort of kind of mean, but makes a good point.
Well, and the thing is, one of the sayings from Buddhism is the Buddha said that if you see a Buddha on the road, kill him, right? So it's almost, if you find somebody that says they have all the answers, you should probably be somewhat wary. Some of my favorite spiritual teachers are those who you get to a certain point, they go, I don't know. Whenever I was in high school, I worked at a pizza place, and one of my favorite customers was the Catholic priest who would come in. Kind of made me upset for a while because he'd always come in about 10 minutes before closing, and so I had to stay open late for him. But after a while, I would get to where I'd go sit down with him at the table, and we would just bat around okay, you're still there. Yeah. I was like, am I talking to myself? The screen went black.
All right, so I think we need to pick up. You're sitting down at the table with the priest.
Yeah, it sounds like a joke, right? So here I was.
So you got a priest just sitting down eating pizza.
Yeah. No, but what I really appreciated about that priest was the ability just to sit around and bat ideas around and talk. And he would freely admit, sometimes go, I don't know. Fine. But I think that is a lost art for many people in the modern world, is just discussion, even if it's challenging, even if it's difficult. And I think that's where Freemasonry really can shine, because you have guys from every walk of life, possibly from any imaginable religion, that can come in and we can get together for a common purpose and discuss ideas about religion. And our lodge, we even bring up politics. I know that's taboo, but we discuss it and we don't get angry. And that's the deal. It's kind of a nice thing about Freemasonry being a safe space. I'm willing to discuss this. I'm not trying to change your idea, but I want to discuss it. Let's talk about it. And there's several people in my lodge who I love dearly, but we could not be any more different than we are on religion or politics. I mean, we are absolutely polar opposites. And you know what, though? And this goes back to, I guess, never admitted to him in person, but there's several times where somebody will bring something up that I really disagree with, but then maybe a week or two later, I'm like, though, I might still disagree with him, but I see where he's coming from, at least. And I have a better picture of who he is as a person. I don't view him as an other. He's a brother.
Yeah. One of the things that I've said. Oh, yeah, echo.
We have an echo. Did you do something different? Okay.
One of the things that I tell candidates when they apply to the lodge is that one of the great benefits of Freemasonry, because we do keep sectarian religion and sectarian politics out of the lodge proper, is that you get an opportunity to, that doesn't mean that we don't discuss it among ourselves after lodge, and but you get an opportunity to find out what a really good human being a guy is before you find out what a jerk he is, because he's on the other side. And it really gives you the ability to step away from that constant fight against the other, and to build some bridges that would have otherwise never been built. And that was part of what made Freemasonry so powerful in the 18th century, because they had just come out of fighting religious wars. They had just come out of, I mean, they were in the midst in England of really dirty, ugly, nasty political battles. And they had an incredibly divided class system in their society. And there were very few places where you could cross those lines, but Freemasonry was one of them.
And I think that's why you see it take off the way it did, because that provided a means for men from different socioeconomic backgrounds and political beliefs, religious beliefs could actually come together.
Right. And it provided a place for those guys to start to act as I often use the phrase shock troops of the Enlightenment. Freemasons really did provide sort of the foot soldiers for the Enlightenment, and for the idea of religious tolerance, for the idea of reason in public discourse, for all those things that we think of as the heritage of liberal Western democracy. Those were values of the fraternity.
Oh, I agree. And it really breaks my heart. I guess this is being from Oklahoma, when I hear brothers who don't quite live up to those ideals too. I was at a Masonic event 2-3 weeks ago, and I heard somebody say that if they ever walked into a lodge that had a Quran on the altar, that they'd turn around and walk out. And of course, my thought was, come to my lodge, challenge accepted. I'll have a whole case of them.
Come to my lodge on any given meeting, and it's right there.
Yeah, I'll give you a copy on your way out.
How does a Teal Lodge differ in its spiritual journey of a candidate or a Mason than a non-Teal Lodge, for those of us who haven't visited a Teal Lodge and don't really know the difference? Other than that, we hear that it's awesome.
Well, our lodge, I guess we had the benefit of starting from scratch. Most of the members, we were founded in 2009, so we're relatively young still. And we had all met at the Guthrie Valley Scottish Rite. And we had, basically a bunch of guys in their 20s, some guys in their 30s, maybe a couple in their 50s that got to know each other at the Scottish Rite. We go have this awesome experience where we'd meditate, we'd discuss Masonic philosophy, then we go back to our mother lodges and pay the bills. And I'm not trying to knock non-Teal lodges at all, but that was just what our experience was. And as, I guess I was 25 years old at the time, full of piss and vinegar, I said, you know what? I can spend my dues money at the pub and have a better time than coming to lodge and gripe about asphalt or gravel for parking lots. And, maybe we don't have to fix the AC unit. We can put a window unit into the lodge room, something like that. So whenever we started discussing starting a lodge, we said, from the get-go, it's going to be about contemplative Freemasonry and personal growth, period. I mean, for the members and for the candidates. So our normal meeting is candlelit incense. We try to keep electric lighting to an absolute minimum. Starts off, we email out the minutes, and we have a very vibrant listserv that we discuss business at. So usually business for our meeting takes all of 3 minutes, 4 minutes at the most. And then we have a meditation or a contemplative moment in lodge and get right to education. And as far as the candidates go, we, in Oklahoma, I think you can pretty much get a petition at any time. You could walk in off the street, shake hands, they hand you a petition. You could turn it in and literally be initiated in less than a month, perhaps, maybe a month and a half. So for us, we require our candidates, number one, they have to wait at least a calendar year before we give them a petition. They have to come, and during that time, they have to make at least 6 events. We never invite them to the lodge, so they never see the lodge building. They never see the inside of the lodge. We say that is our sacred space, and until you are initiated, you have no right to see the lodge. And so what we do, we have dinner usually at a restaurant. We don't have it at the lodge building. So that's what we do for candidates or prospective candidates. We invite them out to dinner, and we really try to, and that's what we try to tell them. We want to get to know you. We have informal functions. We'll go out to lunch. We go out to dinner. We really want to get to know you. And so they come to dinner after lodge. We have 2 or 3 times a year, we'll have a gentleman's night where we try to get to know prospective candidates even better. So we want to the point to whenever it is your intern apprentice degree, we know you on a really personal level, and none of that, Brother Johnson isn't waiting. Just like, who's this guy? We know who that guy is. We've been around him for 9 months to a year, if not longer, and we know who this person is. And so again, they never see the lodge. So from the get-go, we try to instill that this, is a very serious and solemn event. We actually pick them up for the degree, and we bring them to the lodge blindfolded. And when they pull up, we always have tons of visitors at our degree. We'll have a double file line, and the candidate who doesn't know anybody's there, he's blindfolded, walks past the members and goes into the chamber of reflection. And so that way, when he's first brought to light inside the lodge, that's the first time he's ever seen the inside of the lodge. And then between degrees, you have to wait a minimum of 3 months between degrees, and you have to learn questions and answers of the catechism, and you also have to do a project of Masonic value between every degree. So a paper, if you're a photographer, if you want to do some kind of photography piece, something to that effect. So we really slow it down and make it very contemplative for the candidates.
I'm finding more and more lodges are talking about slowing down their degree process. There's a lot of, when I first joined my mother lodge, there was a degree every month, and you move through the degrees pretty much in the course of 3 months. And slowly over time, it's become, well, we'll do degrees every other month. And now it's become, we'll do degrees on a schedule, and if you don't fit the schedule, you're going to have to wait, and we're going to do education and other things in between. And it's become slower and slower with more emphasis on candidate education in between. And that's not being driven by, it's partially being driven by the members of the lodge, but a lot of it's being driven by the candidates wanting a deeper experience and more education as they go through the degree. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, because for me, I joined, the first time I'd ever stepped foot into a Masonic lodge proper was probably in August of 2007. Actually, no, it would have been September of 2007. because I'd started law school, and my entered apprentice degree was October 16th, fellowcraft degree November 21, and I would have had my Master Mason degree in that December had scheduling conflicts not arisen. So 4 months from never footing, I still got it in January. So 4 months from never stepping foot inside the Masonic Lodge, I am now a Master Mason. And I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I could barely remember the do guards and signs. I was terrified every time they were collecting the password that I was going to flub it up or just mess it up somehow. And I just felt like I was unqualified. I mean, I'm completely like, I am not a Master Mason. I don't know anything about this fraternity. I barely know the do guards and signs. Yeah, I memorized the answers to the catechism, but that's it. I mean, that's literally all I know about this. And so for us, it's slow down. And when you become a Master Mason, you've earned it. I mean, we make the guys wait at least 3 months, but I don't think we've ever had anybody go through all the degrees in a year, ever. It's usually about 1.5 years. And we probably only do 2 degrees a year total. I mean, 2 degrees total. I mean, and that's one thing we said all along. We're not trying to grow the lodge. We've got about 27 members, and we're cool. We're fine with that. And most of our new membership comes from affiliations.
Do you guys always open on the 3rd degree? Or if I'm a fellow craft and it's, I have to wait, let's say another 4 or 5 months before I get my Master Mason, do you guys open up on a fellow craft for me?
We can now. That is a new rule since November at Grand Lodge. Our Grand Lodge meets in November. We used to not be able to. The way we worked around that, and again, I guess me being an attorney, it's give me the rules and I'll figure out a work around for it. Yeah. So what we did in the past would be, and again, we don't do much business. So what we did in the past, we would open lodge. While we're opening the lodge, we'd have a member sit out there with the entered apprentice or fellow craft, just shoot the crap with him, or if he wanted to work on his cat lecture, he could. That wasn't really a primary purpose. And then once we opened, we would do whatever business we had to do and immediately go to refreshment. And then the brethren would have the freedom of the lodge, and he could come in for education. So we would do education at refreshment so that he could come in. So that way, because in Oklahoma, otherwise, you'd have to drop down to whatever degree he was in, and you're going to be there for half an hour.
Yeah, I think a lot of Grand Lodges have realized that that's a real barrier and have been working on fixing that. Yes. It was not an issue in Massachusetts from the time I joined. So I was glad that we can transact business on every degree. We can, despite what it says in older editions of the book, we can in fact receive the DD on any degree and so on.
Well, and I remember, that was something that was debated at Grand Lodge as long as I've been a member. And I remember several times the argument against it, and I kid you not, the argument against it was, well, we can't let the EAs and fellow crafts come into a regular meeting because then they're going to realize how bad it is and they'll never come back or finish the degrees. Yeah, and at that point, it's like, you guys need to do a little introspection on that.
I totally think that's one of the reasons we don't do it.
Do what?
I totally think that's one of the reasons a lot of lodges don't do it.
Absolutely. It is. And I remember several times when they would make that argument, it's almost like, are you listening to what you're saying? You're saying that your lodge experience is so bad, so haphazard, that we can't let this guy know how bad it is or he won't finish, but we'll let him finish and we guilt trip him into keep coming. That's our business model. That would never work for any business or organization, and people wonder why our numbers are plummeting. If it's not a fulfilling experience, nobody wants to be there. And so if you do make it a fulfilling experience, then your entered apprentice and fellow crafts, they'll be glad to come still, and they'll still want to finish their degrees. Some people said, well, make them lazy. They'll get their EA or fellow craft and just never pay dues, and they'll just show up for years and years on end and never finish the degrees, which that's crazy.
I love this guy.
Yeah, I don't know if you read my essay on the enemy of the craft, mediocrity.
Over 3,000 people read that.
Yeah, But what shocked me, like, I appreciate that it took off and a lot of people read it and liked it. But what shocked me was the people who responded and said things like, "Are you talking about my lodge? I don't appreciate you talking about my lodge." I'm like, if you think I'm talking about your lodge, I'm talking about your lodge.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to.
My kids, they say, you know, am I in trouble? Then it's like, you probably are. What'd you do?
Yeah, exactly. So, Jason, I really appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your schedule to be here. I know you work hard in trying to bring justice to insurance companies in Oklahoma.
That's right.
And that you have more than one Masonic obligation in a given day. So I really appreciate you taking time out to be with us. Is there anything else you want to let people know?
No, thank you. I appreciate it. It was great fun, and I apologize for the technical difficulties on my end. Hopefully you can edit those out.
We're going to edit them out. People will never know it happened.
They don't even know what you're talking about. But we'll put a link in the description below to our Facebook page, to your book that can be purchased on Amazon, which I'm so excited to get a copy of myself in the mail, waiting for it. Our Facebook page, obviously, yeah. And I think that's it. But yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to come up. We definitely learned a lot. And I think it's really interesting that, just like you said, a lot of guys don't like looking at other religions. And then once you become a Mason, you kind of hear and you learn a little bit more about others, and you're like, oh, it just made me stronger in my own religion. Instead of like, oh, great, now I'm a Buddha. Like, now I gotta go Buddha stuff. So anyway.
So, like every show, we have credits. The fantastic photography on our website is courtesy of Brother Aaron Sherman. Our theme song, currently under development, is composed by Worshipful Christopher Duggan. Our website is maintained, curated, and lovingly tended by Brother Nicholas Harvey. Essential canine supervision is provided by Raksha. Tattoos, courtesy of Joe Boo from Chameleon Tattoo in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's really mean and really expensive. Many thanks to Jacob Savlik, our first Patreon sponsor. The opinions expressed in this podcast and on our website are those of individual contributors and do not represent the opinions of any lodge, Grand Lodge, or other Masonic body. Please visit our website at 3distinctknocks.org. You can follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm David Riley, and I'm incredibly grateful for the brothers that have made this podcast and my Masonic journey so rich, interesting, challenging, and fulfilling. I hope 3 Distinct Knocks has helped you make some daily progress in Freemasonry. Thank you for listening.